I'm going to get the PowerPoint up and running. Okay, so hopefully everyone is here for the R-TFI 2.0 facilitator training. So our purpose for today is really to prepare you guys as existing R-TFI facilitators to understand the changes that we've made to the R-TFI and be able to give you critical information to make sure that you understand why some of the changes were made, what needs to be done to ensure that we have an accurate and self-assessment, and that the process to administer the R-TFI is as efficient as possible. So here are the intended outcomes. We want to begin by a brief review of the history of the R-TFI. We're going to review some of the changes to the 2.0 version. We're going to define what we mean by the reading components of an MTSS framework, discuss the teaming structures that are central to both the elementary and secondary R-TFI, and learn about some of the newer items that have been added. Those items are focusing on the evidence-based reading and writing, instructional practices, instructional design principles, and we've made some modifications to the class-wide social emotional behavioral item within Tier 1. We're then going to start to dig a little bit into the advanced tiers. Now, full disclosure, I don't think that 2 hours is going to make everyone feel equally as comfortable with some of the changes and the nuances within the R-TFI, within the scoring guide, the items themselves. So I really would appreciate it if you guys as facilitators would be thinking about what additional supports do you need? What else could we do to support you guys to be able to feel confident in facilitating the R-TFI, and even speaking to some of your school leaders and colleagues at the ISDs, if you're in an ISD, or colleagues within your school and district, if you're in a district. We want to be able to use this opportunity to think about additional supports beyond our 2 hours together. So we're going to dig right into the R-TFI. While we do that, this is my second time doing Mentimeter. So lower the bar, please, because I'm just a newbie at this. So if you've used Mentimeter before, I'd like you to snap that QR code with your phone. And I'd like you to enter a word that describes your last administration of the R-TFI. And you can actually enter more than one word. Now, hopefully this is working for people. If it's not, I'm not entirely sure what to do. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can look at the results, get ready to prepare the results. Thanks, Lindy, for adding your email into the chat. Okay, let me get Mentimeter. So you can pick more than one word, doesn't have to just be one word. Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, so I'm going to view the results. So far we have 13 votes. So I'm just going to give everyone 10 more seconds. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is what we see. Long. So for those of you who are new at Mentimeter, like me, but I've learned this, the bigger the word, the more times it showed up. So we can see overwhelming, long, encouraging, frustrating for the teams. We're going to want to talk through some of those things. Efficient, group sign language. I can't wait to learn more about group sign language. I'm assuming that's the simultaneous voting process, but maybe not. Growth great. I love that there's growth, lots of discussion. Yes. It was fine. Newbie. So someone saying they're a newbie, no worries. Educational, lengthy. Okay. So this is really good. This is good for us to be able to take stock of what your experiences are the last time you administered the R-TFI. This is the new version. And so we're going to spend some time kind of trying to help you anticipate what to expect. What you're going to hear me emphasize again and again and again is the utility of the R-TFI, the strength of the R-TFI is in the discussion. It is not in gold star, get a perfect score. It is really about the team discussing where they see themselves relative to their colleagues, relative to the school, and really identifying some concrete actions to inform areas for improvement. Okay, so that was my second successful Mentimeter. Woohoo, I'm so excited. All right, let me get my screen sharing. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and the timeline of the R-TFI. All right, here we go. Okay, so the history of the R-TFI. So way back, I'm going to go all the way back into time into 2003, which is the beginning of the Reading First era. So in 2003, there was a tool that was referred to as the Planning Evaluation Tool Revised, or PET-R. And this was a response to intervention reading fidelity tool. It came out of the Reading First days, and it came from the University of Oregon. Its emphasis was on kindergarten through third grade. So the MiMTSS TA Center, we were known as MiBLISI back then, we required teams to, our school teams to complete the PET-R. It was a required fidelity assessment. And there were a couple things that we realized that needed to be addressed. One was full disclosure. We actually saw that the higher the PET-R score, so we had some people that were scoring really high in the PET-R, but then when we looked at curriculum-based measurement data, like DIBELS data, we saw that those teams with the really, really high PET-R total scores tended to have the lower DIBELS total scores. Teams that tended to be really more critical of themselves, or, kind of held themselves to a pretty high standard and were reluctant to give themselves even an iota of credit for the work that they've done. They wanted to stick to the most accurate self-assessment. They tended to score lower on the PET-R, and those schools tended to have higher curriculum-based measurement data. We also realized that the PET-R, because it was written at the kindergarten through 3 level, didn't encompass all of the elementary grades, didn't encompass secondary grades. So the MiMTSS TA Center wanted a tool that was going to yield more accurate self-assessment, that we could eventually make some comparisons, that if a team in fact scored themselves as having the components on the fidelity tool in place, we would expect to see that their curriculum-based measurement data or their reading outcome data would match that. It would be, there'd be goes-upness there. And we wanted to see a tool that would be able to be used beyond the lower elementary grades. So fast forward to 2015, and we released the R-TFI. We intentionally named the R-TFI. We sought permission from our school-wide PBIS Tiered Fidelity Inventory authors. We asked them permission to take a portion of the name of their tool, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and we asked if they could give us permission to do that and put the R in front of it. So it could be the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. We wanted it to be a sister tool to the school-wide PBIS TFI, because as many of you know or have known over the years, we very much support an integrated academic and social emotional behavior MTSS framework. So we wanted 2 tools that could complement each other, not be redundant or duplicative in any sort of a way. We wanted those 2 tools to complement each other. We also wanted a tool that was going to have a scoring guide. It was going to help drive more accurate self-assessment and action planning. So having the R-TFI written with a scoring guide at the elementary grades and the secondary grades, we thought was a really good thing, not just for schools in our state, but frankly, it was something that was needed across the country. Our goal has been and continues to be to engage in a process by which we are analyzing data and validating this tool. Right now, there is not another MTSS, RTI, response to intervention, fidelity tool in reading that currently exists that is reliable and valid. There isn't one yet. And so what we are doing right now, my colleagues, some of whom are on the phone, like Anna Harms, we're in the process of working with multiple states to engage in the process of collecting enough data to actually be able to say that this is a reading fidelity tool for MTSS that is reliable and it's valid and predictive of student outcomes. So from 2015 to present, we chose to keep the R-TFI intact as much as possible, meaning we didn't want to have major edits. You saw, for those of you who've been working with the R-TFI for several years, you saw R-TFI 1.0, R-TFI 1.1, 1.2. Those were those numbers after the decimal point noted very minor changes in the scoring guide, grammar issues, spelling issues, some mistakes that were made. Nothing major was changed. By 2021, enough data had been compiled to run another set of analyses, which Anna and I are going to talk about in a moment. So in the summer of 2015, the MiMTSS TA Center really began our research in the R-TFI. We began by doing a content validation survey. So we engaged other people to experts in the field, people who were also implementers, to help us to seek some guidance about the contents of the R-TFI. Were these the right things to be asking? Were these things aligned with the research? So we engaged in a content validation process. In 2018, we actually conducted our first internal structure and reliability data analysis. So Anna, do you want to say just a couple of statements about what we found in 2018?
Sure. We actually found some fairly promising results back in 2018. We contracted with a university statistician to run a little bit of data on the internal consistency, looking at how the items on the R-TFI sort of hung together. But we didn't have a huge, robust set of numbers by then. And in the following years, we collected a lot more data. So we started to see some promising information about the R-TFI. And then over the next few years, we had gathered more data, and that allowed us to revisit that factor analysis. And one of our internal TA Center staff members, Megan Walsh, she has a really strong stats background. And so she reran that factor analysis for us with some really interesting results. So this is not just Michigan data, multi-state data from across the nation. And one of the things that we found is that items were hanging together at tier 2, and then at tier 1. And then there seemed to be like sort of an advanced tiers, kind of clustering of items, but what were formerly the tier 2 items could have fit really well with tier 1. And they also could have fit really well with the tier 3 items. And so Kim, do you want to talk then about kind of how that informs some decision-making on 2.0?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bottom line is, so your takeaway, if you're thinking, what do I take away from, the time that Anna and Kim are spending on the research? The measure itself, the R-TFI 1.0, it seemed to be a reliable tool, but the question really was, what is it reliably measuring and what should schools do about it? There were two clear factors, tier 1 items And then, like Anna said, a cluster of items that we're focusing on the advanced tiers. We know that tier 2 was not clearly differentiated from tier 1 or tier 3. And so we really did have to start to rethink some of our underlying assumptions, which I am going to get into, especially when we hit the advanced tier items. An underlying assumption within a multi-tiered system of support is that strong implementation of earlier tiers, tier 1, tier 2, leads to stronger implementation of higher tiers. And we just were not seeing that in the data that we had run in this analysis. So here now enters why, what changes were made for the R-TFI that warrant it being called version 2.0. So here's the screenshot of both versions. So you see the little kids for the elementary level edition, slightly different green and blue. And then you see the older students for the secondary level edition. So if you're going to access the R-TFI, we continue to encourage you to always go to the MiMTSS TA Center website. So on this PowerPoint is a hyperlink right to where you can find the R-TFI. I also want to give you the YouTube video for how to rotate the R-TFI. So for some of you, I'm in this camp, so I'm going to fully disclose this. So the new version in the graphic designer, to be able to make enough space for it, the scoring guide, if you look at it electronically, you have to kind of turn your head like this. And so that I didn't know really how to rotate my actual PDF. So Melissa Nantes, our colleague, who's also one of the authors of the R-TFI, she created a wonderful 2-minute video that walks you through how you can actually use Adobe and actually select the pages that have the scoring guide, and you can rotate the pages so you can see them without having to tilt your head. For those of you who are Google Chrome users, if you are to access the R-TFIs through Google Chrome, it'll come up in view only option, and you can actually manually click the rotating button and it'll do it for you. So there's 2 options for you. There is also a link on this PowerPoint slide just to give you a general overview of the R-TFI. So it's going to give you some information about how to access the R-TFIs, and it's going to link you to the R-TFI Facilitator webpage. So the facilitator role, we have a couple people who said that they are newbies, so I want to make sure that we hit upon this. The facilitator role is really an essential role to the R-TFI, not just in the 1.0 version, but it continues to be critical. It is an external, non-voting role. So the facilitator is not someone who weighs in on whether or not the school is at a 2, 1, or a 0 for any of the items of the R-TFI. The facilitator is really designed, that role is designed to be able to prompt the team to use the scoring criteria in a very efficient, neutral way, and to help resolve any disagreements. Now, I've never seen any knockout, drag out disagreements with the R-TFI, but there are times where people look at the scoring guide and they say, I just really think that we are scoring higher than where everyone else is landing, or vice versa. So sometimes the facilitator has to play the role where they're really guiding people to the data sources, which you're going to see where they are in a moment, in order to be able to use some concrete products or indicators to really gauge an accurate self-assessment. So we do sometimes have folks that say, well, we don't have an external R-TFI facilitator. It's just, I'm a facilitator and I'm also on the school leadership team. What do we do? So we do talk about this, that if you are in a school where you don't have an external facilitator, then a reading coach can be the facilitator, but the facilitator still can't vote. So I've also seen instances where if the reading coach wants to be a voting member, I've seen schools that have swapped They've had facilitators from one school come to another school to try to maintain that level of objectivity so that all the people who should be weighing in and voting can do so. So some of the changes to the R-TFI, it is now what we call a two-factor structure. The first factor, it's got tier 1 items. That's the first factor. The second factor are the advanced tiers. So for my elementary colleagues who are on this call right now, this is a change for you because you were used to tier 1, factor 1, tier 2, factor 2, tier 3, factor 3. It is now 2 factors, tier 1 in the advanced tiers. To my secondary colleagues, you're like, gosh, this is pretty similar. You all just didn't call it the advanced tiers. You said tiers 2/3. And I'd say, yep, you're right. The secondary, the previous version of the R-TFI at the secondary level very much was already a 2-factor structure. We also removed the subscales within the tiers. So you may have been accustomed to seeing tier 1 teams, tier 1 implementation, tier 1 resources, tier 1 evaluation. We've removed those subscales within the tool. We've also, in the 2.0 version, provided some distinctions between what we refer to as a reading intervention platform, which should be the foundation by which intervention is provided. So that could be categorized as tier 2. It's the start of tier 2. You're selecting from carefully reviewed and selected interventions. And we've also distinguished between the types of practices or ways by which teams are intensifying reading intervention instruction. And those things would cleanly fall within what many would consider tier 3. But again, these are all clustered in the same factor in the advanced tiers. We reduce redundancy across items. We also removed items for which a district is primarily responsible, and it's outside of the locus of control of the individual schools. So for example, some of you may remember the item in the previous version of the R-TFI that talked about the district selecting tier 1 reading curriculum resources. And I'm seeing, Dora, you nodding your head because I think you know, yep, that's right. And the reality is that that was not in the locus of control of individual school leadership teams. And so we wanted to make sure that any of the items that teams are self-assessing against, that those are things that they have the ability to action plan around and be able to influence. So you'll see the items that are within the district's control taken out. We also included an administration fidelity checklist. So many of you who are on this call are also familiar with the district capacity assessment. And if you are familiar with the district capacity assessment, you are already familiar with the simultaneous voting process, which is the process by which you administer and score the R-TFI, but you're also familiar with a fidelity checklist that's in the DCA. And we've taken the DCA fidelity checklist and we've appropriately contextualized it for the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. So this would be another example of where there's some parallels to help those of you who facilitate both. Like I'm thinking, Dora, you are one of them who facilitates the DCA and R-TFIs, perhaps. You're going to see some consistency there. We also included 2 new writing items at the elementary level. So never before have we included writing. And at the secondary level, we have 1 writing item. We've provided a more precise roadmap for the specific reading practices that should be happening at the classroom level. So it was, it really was, it didn't go unnoticed by myself and Anna and others who are part of designing the R-TFI, that many of the items were separate from classroom instructional practices. And we knew that we wanted to make sure that this version of the R-TFI, since we are going to hope that it will be predictive of student outcomes, we wanted to get closer to classroom practices. We also centered family engagement and equity within the 2.0 version, and we created clear, more consistent distinctions between the 2-point, 1-point, and 0-point scoring criteria. And I will say by doing that, we also gain some real estate and reduce the length of the tool as well. So the next few slides, next 3 slides that are in this PowerPoint, go into further detail about the distinctions between the R-TFI 1.0 and R-TFI 2.0. So I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms and for you guys to talk together in small groups. Note some of those key distinctions that you must bring back to your principals and school leadership teams. What is it that you think that they're going to have to know about the R-TFI? So I'm going to assign automatically, we've got 28 people, so I'm going to do like 7 breakout rooms and give you guys about 10 minutes to go in, talk about the distinctions, and then we will come back and share as a group. So here we go. Hopefully this works, opening up the rooms right now. Hopefully people see them. And I'll share my screen. So I'm curious. I'm curious what you guys talked about. Are there does anyone want to add to the chat or open their mic about one key distinction that they're going to make sure to talk to their principals and school leadership team members about? It's always the awkward Zoom moment. Who's going to talk first?
All right, I'll go.
Go for it.
We had talked a lot about actually just how much more explicit and precise we're guessing that the actual not questions, but statements would be, because it went from sort of a wide range maybe to just definitely more explicit. And so we had mentioned that people using 1.0 probably could have scored themselves high because it was a pretty general statement of, well, yeah, we do that. But then when you get to a more targeted, focused, do we do this? Nope, we don't. And so then that would certainly, I mean, that could take you from a 2 to a 0.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Kate. Anyone else want to share? Can be in chat or you can open your mic. So I know some people haven't had a chance to really dig into the R-TFI 2.0. So I will kind of share what my group talked about. Oh, I see Katie. We appreciated the classroom focus. Yeah, Katie, that's been getting the most positive feedback across states. So there are many states that are using the R-TFI. We have Ohio, the Pennsylvania MTSS network has now adopted the R-TFI for use. The state of Washington is using the R-TFI. South Dakota's starting to use the R-TFI as well. And consistently along the way, New York, the New York State Department of Ed is using it. Consistently, the feedback is just what you said, the appreciation of the emphasis at the classroom level. I did share with the team that I had the gift of being a part of, that there is a very key distinction that you are going to have to talk to your principals and school leadership team members about. In the R-TFI 2.0, we actually, we set up the provision where the tier 1 items are administered by the school leadership team. The advanced tier items are administered to a multidisciplinary team. Like Dora was saying, we have in Hastings an intervention team, a team that's responsible for overseeing intervention. I'm going to talk a little bit later when we get to the advanced tier items about the functions of a multidisciplinary team. We don't really care what you call it. Yes, it's called a multidisciplinary team in the R-TFI 2.0, but as long as the functions or the purpose of the team aligns, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But that will be different. I had shared with our group that too often we're seeing across the country, so much stuff is put on the school leadership teams. Everything from PBIS implementation to school-wide reading implementation, overseeing a math initiative. I mean, I'm just giving like examples of the multiple things that team is working to support school-wide implementation of. And what we have found historically, not just in our state, but other states as well, is that there hasn't been enough time and attention to ensuring that school-wide kids are getting effective, efficient, equitable access to intervention, and that the intervention that they are in fact receiving is effective. And so what we're doing, and this would completely align with the implementation science literature, one of the key ways to be able to scale up the implementation of something is to really help to activate teams who are going to support the principal, have some shared distributive leadership, and being able to see the effective use and scale up and sustainability of school-wide priorities, intervention, access, and effectiveness being one of the school-wide priorities. So, like, spoiler alert, if there's anything you're going to walk away from, you may have teams that are like, what do you mean? The SLT was the only entity that administered the R-TFI. That is very much being like, we've set the stage for that change to happen. So so in terms of the sections of the R-TFI, I've already given the spoiler alert that you've got a school leadership team completing the R-TFI for tier 1. The advanced tiers are done by the multidisciplinary team. The goal of this, the goal of the R-TFI still remains the same, that this is about strengthening reading supports that are accessible to all learners, including students with disabilities. And so the goal really is to use this information as a way to design, identify and build upon the assets that exist in the school, and be able to identify areas that need more attention and need some continuous improvement. This is not about a gold star. This is not about just checking the box and completing the assessment as if it is some kind of monitoring compliance task. So the scoring guide is structured in this sort of a way. And so table 4 in the R-TFI, this is on page 15, whether you have the elementary edition or you have the secondary edition. Page 15 gives you an overview of how the scoring guide is laid out. So we still begin all the way over to the left-hand side. We still give the item itself. The next column over is the 2-point scoring criteria. And the big change, one of the big changes, is we've now put the data sources right next to the 2-point scoring criteria. I don't know about you, but I historically, in all of the R-TFIs that I've administered, sometimes because the data sources used to be the last column, it was oftentimes forgotten about or overlooked. I've seen that now that it is intentionally placed next to the 2-point column. We have individuals on teams attending more to the data sources to be able to substantiate the extent to which they have all of those pieces in the 2-point scoring criteria in place. So that is a new feature. We also, the 1-point and the 0-point column are both now exist in one column together. The 1-point is at least half of the 2-point criteria are in place. 0 points, the criteria for the 2-point or 1-point response are not in place. So we've really tried to simplify that. And that did come through, Judy, who was in the group that I was in our last breakout room, that was also noted as well, that there's some efficiencies now when in the way we've structured the R-TFI for administration and scoring. So this is a real example of the value of using the new scoring guide the way that it was structured to be used. So we all have, whether you're operating from the elementary edition or the secondary edition, item 1.2 is the same. It's about systems level coaching. So the school has access to systems level coaching. So if I were facilitating the R-TFI, because we do have some newbies as they were listed on the Mentimeter word cloud. If I were facilitating the R-TFI, I would read the item and I would facilitate like this. The school has access to systems level coaching. The 2-point scoring criteria, systems level coaching includes activities to develop the capacity of individuals and teams to analyze data, to prioritize school-wide needs, manage school-wide assessment and data coordination, determine professional learning opportunities and coaching opportunities needed in reading science, methods for integrating social, emotional, and behavioral supports with reading instruction, and implementation best practices. 4, develop a plan to implement the reading components of an MTSS framework. And 5, communicate with other school teams and the district implementation team. And here we have some data sources that we can use to substantiate our self-assessment. The 1-point and 0-point column, we would score a 1 if at least 3 criteria from the 2-point response are in place. 0, neither the criteria from the 2-point or 1-point response are not in place. So that's an example of how I would facilitate it. I would give people an opportunity to reflect and figure out how they're going to score. Now, in the Zoom world, I've done the R-TFI using the poll, the Zoom poll. I've actually taken each of the items of the R-TFI, created a poll for each item with 2 being fully in place, 1 being partially in place, 0 being not yet. I've also included an option for don't know on Zoom, just depending upon who is participating. And then I've released the poll. For those of you who are in person, you may still be able to use either Post-its or fingers to do the simultaneous voting process. The goal is to have people vote. You're going to see the extent to which you have consensus on the score. Remember, consensus does not mean everyone has to agree on the exact same score. What consensus means is that the majority score is understood. And so folks who didn't feel that the school was there yet related to that item, those individuals can support the larger group score and be able to ensure that if they have things that they want represented in the notes or the action items, that those things are documented. So we come to consensus, and there are times where, as a facilitator, you may have to do some additional probing. So true story, I probed in a school where some of the people said, we're fully a 2 here. And it was the coach herself and 2 other members that said, we're a 1. And the coach herself said, I'm looking at the data source and I don't have an activity log, but I can tell you if I did, I have not been thinking about professional learning opportunities. I haven't been thinking about coaching opportunities. So this coach in real time modeled herself how to use the data source, and was able to say that number 3 was not happening. And she also said, I don't even really know what it means to manage the school-wide assessment data. And she goes, so at this point, I'm not willing to say that we're there yet. So she was able to, to say that 2 of those items were not there. And then someone else had chimed in and said, well, we haven't really even been communicating with the district implementation team. So that's the power of this conversation. They noted some quick wins. The data sources drove the consensus of the score, and it really helped in the end result in an accurate, a more accurate self-assessment. One of the other items that is in here that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is item 1.3, because you'll notice we have a new term that is introduced. So the plan's goals used to be SMART in R-TFI 1.0. They used to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. In R-TFI 2.0, they're now SMARTY. And so it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, and equitable. And a common question that I get quite frequently is, what do you mean by SMARTY goals? So here are some examples of SMARTY goals. So I'm going to let you take a minute and read these 2 example SMARTY goals that are on this slide. If you've already finished, you can flip to the next slide. There's a 3rd example SMARTY goal. Here's the 3rd one. So one of the key distinctions between R-TFI 1.0 and 2.0 is us meaningfully centering equity within this tool. And so it's very important for us to have an emphasis on the goals being equitable. And so you can see where we've given you 3 examples of how to do that. Anna Harms and I have talked in depth about additional scaffolds for school teams, grade level teams, even district teams who would be looking at these school level goals and thinking from a district-wide perspective, how do we think about the centering of equity as it relates to MTSS and accelerating literacy outcomes. And we've talked about some ideas, some sentence stems, some multiple examples. Spoiler alert, though, you could turn to, I'm gonna share my document camera. You could turn to R-TFI item 1.5, and R-TFI item 1.5 is actually going to give you like some really good examples. That these 3 examples that we looked at were specifically from item 1.5. So here's my document camera. Hopefully you can see that. So item 1.5 in the R-TFI is talking about how the school leadership team is using data to monitor the effectiveness of the tier 1 reading components of an MTSS framework. You could look at these examples here, and Anna and I actually took some of these, some of these numbers from the scoring guide and turn them into SMARTY goals. Anna, is there anything you would add, not to put you on the spot, but since you joined the training, I'm going to leverage your expertise. Anything you would add about creating SMARTY goals?
I think it's not something that we have historically done well internal to the TA Center, and I expect that there are some districts out there who are more advanced at doing this, and maybe some who are just getting started. So all along that continuum. I think what we see, though, is when we look at school-wide data, it can really hide disparities that we see between different groups of students based on a variety of different social identities. And it can hide disparities that we see for some of our most marginalized students. So the E sometimes speaks to unpacking disaggregated data, but it can also speak to, if you saw that second example SMARTY goal that Kim put up, it can also speak to pulling in more data sources that are coming from the voices of students and family members as well.
Yep. And for some of you who might be going to the MyKIP conference, I don't know if anyone's going to the MyKIP conference, but you'll have the gift of hearing from Shane Saphir, who's going to be doing one of the keynotes on the book Street Data. And really, street data is really, intentionally gathering experiential data from parents, caregivers, students, staff. And you'll see that the R-TFI has very much incorporated this type of experiential data, perception data, as ways, like this third example is one of them, ways in which you are, operationalizing some of the things that are in the book Street Data. A lot of people are reading this book now in spaces, and I know MiKIP, or the Michigan Continuous Improvement Facilitator Network, they've been doing quite a bit of work with the book Street Data, as has the General Education Leadership Network. So I just wanted to give a nod to some of the alignment there. Okay, so now we're going to move into the reading components of an MTSS framework, which is really the meat and potatoes of the R-TFI. The R-TFI 1.0 used to be framed around a school-wide reading model. And one of the key distinctions in the 2.0 version is that the construct has been shifted to the reading components of an MTSS framework. And so I want to unpack what we mean by the reading components of an MTSS framework. So we're all in the state of Michigan. We are very well aware of the definition of MTSS, Michigan's definition of MTSS. I wanted to make sure that we included it here. And so, we've got our state's definition of MTSS. We have the 5 essential components of an MTSS framework. The visual display of those 5 components was chosen to be a pinwheel graphic. They are intended to be integrated with one another. These things are fleshed out in Michigan Department of Education's MTSS practice profile. And these 5 essential components appear in a variety of sections of state aid. And so in the introduction of the R-TFI, and the one of the beginning pages, right? I think it's page 2, we have a big text box that defines the reading components of an MTSS framework. And you'll see the 5 essential components of MTSS listed. So the R-TFI really is designed to be a roadmap for school teams to be able to use the reading components of an MTSS framework. And those reading components of an MTSS framework are encompass data, they encompass systems, and they encompass practices, evidence-based practices, or in some cases, curriculum resources, programs, et cetera. And the focus of data, systems, practices is to make sure that there's alignment with those MTSS essential components or core features, and they complement the social, emotional, behavioral components of an MTSS framework. We very much believe in an integrated model of support. So if we think about the reading components of an MTSS framework, we've got the 5 essential components, and we would apply those 5 essential components to critical word reading and comprehension processes that are predictive of reading outcomes. So many of you are familiar with the simple view of reading, but what I'm not sure is if you've had a chance to hear from our good friend, Dr. Sharon Vaughn, about to hear her definition of the simple view of reading. So what I'd like to do is share Sharon Vaughn's definition of or explanation of the simple view of reading. This is right from our YouTube page. She did it really well. And I don't know if there's ever anyone that, like, I would love to be her groupie. I absolutely adore Sharon Vaughn. Okay, here we go.
I think we can go to the next one. So let's just start with sort of a model that we can have in our head. And, this model really has helped me as a teacher and as an educator, because it allows me to make decisions about what's important based on the progression of the age of the student. And so many of you, I know, have heard of the simple view of reading. But this is what's important. It's not simplistic. It's just simple in that the organizational structure is recognizable and applicable. Let me tell you something that I find interesting. I recently did a search on the simple view of reading, and it has been cited over 1,000 times. I recently did a review on the simple view of reading, and theoretically, it has been tested by more than 20 independent research teams across the world in different languages and with the same result. So what is that result and why is it important? That result is that if we think about word recognition, word reading, being able to decode as an important construct, and we think about linguistic comprehension, that is extracting and constructing meaning from the spoken word. So we think about those two large constructs. Word reading, if students can read the words. Number two, if they know what the words mean and can think about those words within the syntax of the language in which they're using to read. Multiplicatively, not additively, multiplicatively, it equals reading comprehension. And this model has actually been tested and it's really holds up. If students can read words, they know what those words mean and have an understanding of language, they will be able to understand text. And this particular simple view of reading isn't simplistic for this reason. Because it's multiplicative, what it means is that if there's a zero in either of those two constructs, guess what you get with reading comprehension? When you multiply anything by zero, what do you get? So you get zero, of course. So we need to build both understanding of language and vocabulary and syntax, and we need to build word recognition. And the reason it's important to a progression is because word recognition takes on greater importance in the younger grades, and linguistic and language and meaning take on greater importance in the older grades. So that is how it fits into our progression.
Okay. So anytime I get to hear Sharon Vaughn explain the simple view of reading, I always listen. I think she just has such an eloquent way of saying it. I'm curious if people are willing to either open their mic or add to the chat. What are some of the takeaways from, that you heard Sharon say about the simple view of reading? Think about your colleagues who are not on this call. Are there things that maybe they don't yet understand or haven't had the gift of being able to do more learning around the simple view of reading? What's going through your mind?
I liked that she explained that it's a multiplication problem. I think sometimes that detail is just overlooked. And that she did, word recognition times 0 language comprehension equals 0. And it's always not that clear cut. Sometimes you have a, 0.7 and a 0.5.
Yeah.
But there are going to be, if you have someone struggling with reading comprehension, there are deficits in one of those two areas or both.
Thanks, Jen. We're seeing some people add to the chat. Jason, I appreciate the distinctions between the model being simple, but the ideas in the process not being simplistic at all. Yeah, that's a huge takeaway. Absolutely. Heidi, our teachers are gaining more understanding of being able to be accurate readers in order to comprehend. All great points. Now, some of you might be familiar with a book. Gosh, it's a couple years old right now, but it's called The Cognitive Foundations of Reading and Its Acquisition. So it's got Wesley Hoover, William Tumner, who are also associated with the, their development of the simple view of reading and their research in the simple view of reading. And I wanted to point out a page that is of particular importance. So in the Cognitive Foundations book, Hoover and Tumner talk about how the simple view of reading is a static concurrent model of reading. So it means that it provides an account of reading at any single point of time and when all of its constructs are appropriately measured. However, the simple view of reading is not a model of reading development. So the simple view of reading is not going to talk about the when certain skills need to be introduced from an instructional perspective, when certain skills fade or are not necessarily the primary point of instructional focus, but instead are being generalized and refined over the years. It does not state how reading develops over time. And what I will say is that Hoover and Tumner define the empirical support behind the simple view of reading, but they also acknowledge that there are issues that continue to be investigated. And within this book chapter, they outline what some of those things are. So a lot of people are asking me about the role of motivation and executive functioning. And that is something that is in fact currently being investigated, that people are trying to investigate whether there are executive functioning in cognition that makes contributions to reading comprehension beyond that made to the word recognition and language comprehension components. But at this point, those things haven't been done. So the simple view of reading was not intended to talk about the learning progression or when and how certain things are introduced. And so I think that that's very important and is contributing to some of the misunderstandings about the simple view of reading. I see Jason saying, I love that distinction. It's a measurement model, not a developmental, instructional, or learning model. Yeah, I just wanted to make that point for the group. So the simple view of reading is very much a part of the R-TFI. And when we think about the reading components of an MTSS framework, we're talking about, the simple view of reading provides a foundational knowledge base. And then within an MTSS framework, it is important that the curriculum, instruction, assessment practices, those things are nested within an MTSS framework. And it helps be able to make sure that we're making decisions, that we're making good decisions that are benefiting all learners. The other thing that we very much as a TA center and within the R-TFI are trying to emphasize, we do try to talk about the reading learning progression. So if you were to continue watching the YouTube video of Sharon, it was Sharon and I talking about the intensifying literacy instruction essential practices guide, we would have introduced you to this reading learning progression. It was the first version of the learning progression. It didn't have the strands of the rope in the document itself, but most of the contents were here. What we did is we tried to create some approximations of what are some of the word recognition, language comprehension, reading comprehension skills that are both found in our state standards, that have evidence that they are predictive of reading outcomes, and really wanted to make sure that we were talking about points of time when these things are first introduced, when instruction drops off. There are some things where instruction just continues throughout a student's educational career, like oral language, background knowledge, higher order cognitive skills. We begin and foster and develop and cultivate those things over time. It's not something that just drops off. Reading comprehension, while we have kids at the early childhood, kindergarten, first grade level that aren't necessarily reading themselves the text, their comprehension processes are focused on listening, but that is transitioning into reading comprehension. And we should be focusing on reading comprehension over time throughout our students' educational careers. If any one of these strands of the rope are frayed, are starting to come apart, it's going to impact the overall strength of the rope that is tied together. And so some of you who've been taking letters training, language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, you guys may be familiar with Scarborough's reading rope. This is kind of a spin on Scarborough's reading rope, in that we want to emphasize there are critical things that make up word recognition skills, language comprehension skills, reading comprehension processes, and these things all very intimately tie together and create skillful reading. So the reading learning progression is something that's represented. You will see some of these classroom items giving a nod to the word recognition, language comprehension, and reading comprehension processes that are in the bolded text. And in a little bit later, I'm going to talk about the dyslexia handbook. You'll see this graphic also in Michigan's dyslexia handbook that's been recently released. So I want to give us time in our breakout rooms to discuss some common scenarios that we're hearing about the R-TFI. So I've heard a lot where a principal's asked to develop some SLT background knowledge in the simple view of reading and the reading learning progression. So I want you to take some time to share your thoughts, to identify and share out on this first and second scenario. So if you're asked to build the principal's background knowledge and the school team's knowledge in the simple view of reading and the learning progression, have you thought about a student in light of the simple view of reading? And can you use that student profile as a way to help identify which parts of the simple view of reading that may be the student's strengths and certainly might be the student's opportunities for growth? Another scenario that's a common scenario is that I've had principals say, can you explain the reading learning progression to me, especially now that the dyslexia handbook's out? So I want to give you some time to talk about the simple view of reading, the reading learning progression, and how you might build some background knowledge as an R-TFI facilitator so that they understand what's underlying these items of the R-TFI. So I'm going to put us in our breakout rooms, and then we will come back. I do have a process check. I'm going to ask Jen Ferlito, can I put you on the spot and ask, since I'm subbing for Laura McQuarrie, does this end at 5 or 5:30? Because someone was asking me.
5:30.
5:30. Okay, so it's 5:30. I didn't get the registration link because I'm subbing. So okay, 5:30 to whoever asked me that question. Okay, let me get the breakout rooms going. So you're talking about the simple view of reading, and you're talking about the learning progression. Opening the breakout rooms now, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Hey, Rebecca from Washington, how are you? I didn't know you were going to join, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I didn't know I was going to join either. It popped up on my calendar as something I signed up for, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, very good. I mean, we are
Yes.
here. Let me pause this. Okay, so we're going to spend our last few minutes focusing on the tier 1 classroom items. I'm going to talk first about elementary, then we're going to shift to the secondary items, and it's very, very light touch. We're then going to shift to the advanced tier items where we talk about some of the scope and sequence of professional learning and things that would need to happen to support multidisciplinary teams in the advanced items. So for elementary reading instructional practices, the emphasis is teachers accessing evidence-based reading. So they have access to quality evidence-based reading curriculum resources, and they're using those resources to provide daily instruction in the foundational reading skills, the foundational writing skills, and the comprehension processes necessary for students to be able to construct meaning from text that's appropriate for their grade level. So the foundational reading skills encompass developing phonemic awareness. We're talking about basic word recognition decoding skills, advanced decoding skills. So that's the decoding of multisyllabic words. We're talking about encoding, so spelling, and morphology, or teaching meaningful parts in words. When we think about the elementary items, some of the foundational reading skills are introduced and mastered at certain grade levels. That learning progression slide really outlined that. When it comes to basic and advanced decoding skills, notice that had a tail that went on all the way through 12th grade. For those of you who have children or have children or who either love or used to love dinosaurs, I was tasked with reading the dinosaur encyclopedia as a bedtime story. And I needed to really use my advanced decoding skills to be able to read the dinosaur names. And so that is a good example of a foundational word reading or a word recognition skill that we continue to refine and apply in new contexts in order to be able to successfully read the word. So those items, you're going to see foundational word reading skills in item 1.9. You're going to see items focused on comprehension, inference making, questioning. You're going to see those as well in the tier 1 items. You're going to see the 2 items at the elementary level focused on writing, one being writing foundational skills. So emphasis on handwriting, conventions, so appropriate punctuation, capitalization, keyboarding. And you're going to see an item 1.13, which is talking about giving students frequent opportunities for extended writing about the text that they're reading. At the secondary level, tier 1 is focused on the integration of listening, speaking, reading, and writing across core subject areas or across the disciplines. So your core subject area teachers, math, science, social studies, English language arts, we're asking that they meaningfully incorporate discipline-specific text into their core subjects, into their daily lessons. And they do that in order to ensure that kids have practice opportunities for reading. They are also infusing evidence-based instructional strategies to support students' ongoing comprehension of the or understanding of those core subject area concepts. From an elementary perspective, we do attend to the elements of explicit instruction. So from an instructional design principle perspective, that's item 1.14. So teachers provide intentional and differentiated tier 1 instruction. You'll see the elements of explicit instruction show up there. Secondary, the writing is focused on frequent structured opportunities for kids to write about the text that they've read. And both of the elementary and secondary editions have an item that emphasizes social emotional behavior supports in the classrooms. So those are all the classroom specific items. So now for the advanced tiers, let's dig into the advanced tiers. So in the advanced tiers, you're going to see the terms intensifying instruction. And that really is what the advanced tiers are focusing on. It's intensifying reading instruction. So when we talk about intensifying instruction, what we mean is that this is a data-driven process for professionals to make decisions about how to enhance the instruction for individual students who have not had an instructional response to the intervention that we would have expected. And what you're going to see in the advanced tier items is that we're talking about using a standard protocol intervention. At the same time, though, kids who need to have an emphasis on intensifying instruction, this would be for kids who haven't responded to the standard kind of protocol of tier 1 class-wide curriculum resources. They've then needed some tier 2 supports. And for students who need that individualized intensification, they have likely not responded to the intervention instruction as we would have expected. So we've given kind of this definition of what we mean by intensifying instruction. In the professional learning that we're developing that would support school teams, we would refer to that team as a multidisciplinary team, but Dora, you could still say intervention team, it sounds like. The team who's going to oversee and attend to intervention, people's access to intervention, the effectiveness of intervention. We provide professional learning. We have a series of modules that are currently going through usability cycles that we're getting ready to release statewide. And some of the acronyms that we use are things like database individualization. And I'm going to define that in a moment. We also use the acronym IIIP, or Individualized Intensive Intervention Plan. IEP, individualized education plan, MDT, multidisciplinary team. And we still talk about the grade level team in the advanced tiers. So what you're going to see is you're going to see the R-TFI 2.0 really starting to move beyond what many have referred to as a traditional approach to MTSS. So across the country, it's not uncommon to speak to schools and districts about MTSS. Some still call it RTI. And you see things like this, or you hear statements like this. Well, we must have a strong tier 1 before you can work on tiers 2 and 3. You hear people talking about students who are placed in tiers. You hear about general education teachers being responsible for tier 1 and 2. You hear some deficit-based language that they actually come out and say, if tier 1 and tier 2 fail, it's a student problem. And then the student problem solving process begins. Now, again, I'm intentionally using some deficit-based language to make a point. The reality is these are real comments that my colleagues, my MTSS colleagues across the country we have heard repeatedly used in different spaces. We've also heard people say special education is outside of MTSS. It's beyond a multi-tiered system of support. So here's the problem with that traditional approach. The tier 1 problem is never really solved. And so when people say we can't even think about tiers 2 and 3 until we've, quote, addressed tier 1, that is unrealistic. We have seen across grade levels, if you wait until 80% of students, if you wait to put any cognitive energy to students gaining access to intervention until you have 80% or more of the students supported by tier 1, you could go years before you think about attend to, in a meaningful way, intervention supports. So the tier 1 problem is never really solved. And especially in light of the pandemic, there have been, I was just looking at some recent NAEP data. NAEP administered a long-term trend reading assessment to students age 9. And what they found was a decrease in 5 NAEPs, 5 points in the NAEP long-term trend score. That's the steepest decline since 1990. And the purpose of NAEP administering the long-term trend reading assessment was to look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, given the loss of instruction. So the steepest decline has happened since 1990. So this notion of, whoa, we've got a tier 1 issue, we can't think about intervention, that's just not realistic. Another problem with the traditional approach is this notion, like students are not their tier. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about a tier 2 student or a tier 3 student. So that's another unintended consequence of the traditional approach. Now, it's not to say that many of us who supported the traditional approach years ago intended for people to say tier 2 student, tier 3 student. That was not the case. It's just over the years, some of those misunderstandings have continued to emerge, and we've got to start thinking a little bit differently about MTSS. We've often seen special education staff excluded from a part of the MTSS framework. Student problem solving approach nationally has been predominantly deficit based. There's also been limited team-based leadership in the advanced tiers, and the implementation of tier 2 hasn't really been clearly distinguished or differentiated from the level of intensity for tier 3 intervention. And so our colleagues, Lynn and Doug Fuchs, have even spent quite a bit of time really exploring and pulling out some of these problems with this traditional approach of MTSS. And that's one of the reasons why we've cited Lynn and Doug on this slide. So here's the alternative approach and I'm going to frame this around a student perspective, a resource perspective. So the student perspective, they flexibly move. across the tiers with varying levels of instructional support. All students access the supports that they need when they need them. We focus on instructional problem solving, not student problem solving. We're going to focus on the things that we can control. We can control our instruction. And students with disabilities are fully integrated into this. It's not a special education is not a separate island that's outside of the context of a multi-tiered system of support. From a teaming perspective, this alternate approach focuses on schools working to improve both tier 1 and the advanced tiers. So if you think of our triangle or pyramid, whatever geometric shape that you subscribe to for MTSS, we're going to go up the triangle and down the triangle. And it really is a bottom up, top down, and right in the middle, those two things meeting are the way by which all students are going to be able to get the support that they need. Grade level teams have a huge role in this, but their primary role is to focus on the universal tier 1, on that tier, which makes sense. And all students are a part of that, including students with disabilities. So when some people think, well, why are you having grade level teachers attend to tier 1? Shouldn't they be focusing on students that need intervention supports or students with disabilities? I said, absolutely, but they need to know how to meaningfully differentiate class-wide tier 1 reading instruction to be able to support students with disabilities, to be able to support students who are accessing intervention, to help them transfer, generalize those intervention skills to the classroom reading instruction that is happening. Another team is developed that is, or another team is leveraged if an existing team is there to help offload some of the attention to MTSS. This team is going to focus on, a multidisciplinary team will focus on the advanced tiers, and the grade level team, the multidisciplinary team, and the school leadership team, they coordinate supports. Neither team is more important than the other. They each have a very specific role in supporting students within an MTSS framework. From a resources perspective, the alternative approach to MTSS is talking about all students receiving high quality tier 1. All students who need it participate in a validated intervention platform. So there are carefully reviewed and selected intervention materials that are the platform by which students are placed into intervention. There's validated assessments to monitor students' progress, and we're guided by decision rules to know when the intervention instruction needs to be intensified. All of these things are documented, they are manualized, they are written into what we call an intervention system, and that guides teams in their ability to implement the advanced tiers. So the R-TFI 2.0, the advanced tier items, really do talk about in the 2-point scoring criteria what this looks like. So how does this fall within MTSS intervention support and special education students? Well, from a student perspective, MTSS is all students can access. And this includes students with disabilities. When we're talking about tier 2 and 3 intervention supports, that's for any student not meeting grade level expectations or grade level benchmarks. And many students with disabilities can benefit from tier 2, tier 3 intervention supports. From a special education perspective, that's legally required for students who have identified disabilities. So only students with disabilities receive the special education supports. We are intentionally talking about the role of special education in the advanced tiers because of the traditional approach, which was, well, special education is beyond MTSS. I've even had schools that have said, well, that's our 4th tier, or that's our 6th tier in an MTSS framework. So when we think about MTSS, like the teams who support MTSS, tier 2, tier 3, special education, the grade level team and the multidisciplinary teams really are working at making sure the instruction is benefiting all students, and that includes intervention instruction, tier 1 classroom intervention, or excuse me, tier 1 classroom reading instruction. For a tier 2, tier 3 intervention perspective, that's the multidisciplinary team. And when it comes to special education, that too could be supported by a multidisciplinary team, but it's going to include other people who are a part of the child's IEP team. And so it could include those core members of what we're referring to as a multidisciplinary team, plus additional people. When we think about this from a plan perspective, MTSS, we have an implementation plan, curriculum guides, an intervention system. These things are documents that you can point to. They're data sources in the R-TFI. From a tier 2, tier 3 intervention perspective, you still have that intervention system because that fleshes out what's happening for intervention. But now you also have a group intensive intervention plan. If the entire group receiving intervention isn't responding to the intervention instruction as we would have anticipated, or you have an individualized intensive intervention plan. If an individual student or two out of the group are not responding as we would have expected. And those are two of the documents that I put into the chat when we started our time together. I gave you an example of the group intensive intervention plan and the individualized intensive intervention plan. From a special education perspective, the plan is the IEP. So when we think about individualized intensive intervention plans and IEPs, the individualized intensive intervention plan outlines the intervention supports on the left-hand column of this slide. It specifies goals related to the intervention supports. It considers the alignment between intervention in the general education curriculum. It specifies the amount of intervention support that's being given, where it's happening, who's going to be providing it. It outlines the materials and what's happening in detail. The IEP, which is the special education side, that too specifies goals. That too considers alignment between intervention and general education curriculum. It also specifies the amount and location, but this time it's of services, and it specifies accommodations for general education instruction. So we wanted to make a distinction because a lot of people are saying, is an individualized intensive intervention plan one and the same with an IEP? And the answer is no, it's not. There are very distinct purposes for each of those things. So there are the process that we're using in the advanced tiers is database individualization. This really notes what is happening in tier 2 and tier 3. It's the progression of increasingly more intensive intervention support, starting at the top of this graphic in that orange rectangle. That's the first step of database individualization. And it progressively, step 2 is we progress monitor kids that are getting intervention, determine is there instructional response. If there's not instructional response, we go to more intensive supports, which is the last 3 shapes of this graphics. That's DBI, database individualization, steps 3 through 5. So there are a lot of different names that are used to define this process. I've used one name, or 2 names. I've said DBI, the acronym, and I've spelled it all out, database individualization. But some people also call it database instruction, database intensification. You're going to hear us as a TA center and really focus on DBI, database individualization, or this concept of intensifying literacy instruction. You won't see DBI as an acronym spelled out in the R-TFI. You will very much read it in the scoring guide, but it is intensifying literacy instruction. In our training materials that would align with the R-TFI, we are overt about it being database individualization. So if you think about what's tier 2, what's tier 3, these first 2 steps of the graphic are tier 2. The last 3, like oval, rectangle, oval, those things represent tier 3. So the evidence for this note for database individualization, which is how how the R-TFI 2.0 is focusing on intensifying literacy instruction. There are empirical studies that have supported the effectiveness of, or demonstrated the effectiveness of DBI. And so it is something that we're also collaborating with our colleagues from the National Center for Intensive Intervention about. The last thing that I just wanted to focus on is that you're going to see in this, in the R-TFI, you're going to see us talk about variables to intensify the intervention instruction. You're going to see us recommend or reference dimensions of intervention intensity. And I wanted to give you the actual handout that comes from our colleagues at the National Center for Intensive Intervention. That really is the basis by which we are helping people look at data and then determine which variable, one or two variables, we would want to adapt in order to intensify the instruction. So let me stop right there since we are at like 5 minutes before we are taking off. What thoughts do you guys have or things that you would like to see more of as we continue to develop you as R-TFI 2.0 facilitators? What's going through your minds?
Well, one thing that I think right away is, because I'm the facilitator for the entire district of Hastings, our teams are going to freak out when they start scoring poorly again. Because they've been so used to doing things quite well. But when I look through these, I was like, I don't think they're going to be able to score themselves as twos like they were in the past, because there's just so much more specific criteria.
Yep. That's a really good point. You know, and one way to temper that, Dora, is, you know, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, really. I mean, when it comes to the number, so, you know, we should be able to see over time, fewer and fewer kids need access to intervention because we're strengthening tier 1. And those who are accessing intervention, we should see them, their progress monitoring at or above the aim line. We should see that opportunity gap closing. And so one suggestion I have to facilitators is maybe like pre-correct by looking at some data and just seeing if some of the data would support, some of the current data may support some different self-assessment for some of those items. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dora. I appreciate your honesty about that. Any other thoughts?
I just had, I had shared this with Anna in a breakout room, but in the past with working with coaches, we have utilized those priority, like they used to be called cheat sheets. They're itemized priority lists where they kind of showed based on your stage of implementation. And we had kind of created some documents, some Excel sheets that were kind of easy for coaches to use to kind of prioritize what TFI item they need to kind of start coaching their teams on.
Yep.
She said that you guys haven't created that, but I just want, again, I let her know that we do utilize those, or we did for that. So if you guys are going to, if you could continue to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. Anna's right. We have not done that yet, but you're not the only person. Our Ohio colleagues and others have also been using them, and they too have requested updated coaching service delivery plans and cheat sheets. So yes, that's coming. I promise you. Any other thoughts?
Well, the only other thing I have is just, I haven't had a lot of time to dig into the items and things, but once I do, is there a good way to get questions to you, or I don't want to bombard you too much all at once?
No, that's okay. I think what we'll do, so based on, you know, the group, I think what we can do is create, you know, have almost like a go-to person that you can reach out to with questions about the R-TFI. And we can have a, you know, even a way to communicate on more regularly with the R-TFI facilitators. So that's a good suggestion, Dora. I'm not exactly sure which one I mean, I'm still the person you reach out to after Carrie Ann had left. So feel free to continue to reach out to me, but I just can't commit to like everyone emailing me and me being able to get back like right away. So I'm going to want to enlist in the help of my colleagues who aren't on the call.
I guess, Kim, I have a question regarding like professional development surrounding some of this. So, you know, we have a lot of initiatives going on that's kind of similar. So we have, you know, the BHAT teams, behavioral health assessment teams that are doing similar work. We're on tier 2 behavior. And then we also have like, we're participating in that pilot project with the MDT in 1st and 2nd grade, that research cohort. But once the teams start taking these and they start scoring though, they're going to want professional development to expand on that. So I guess I'd like your feedback on, should we start chipping away at that, or how far out is like MiMTSS sponsored PD, where should we hold off and wait for that to come?
So I'm actually working with Jamie Norman from Bayernick ISD and some of the other ISD special education directors to start to get a statewide, you know, professional learning series that really does focus on the advanced tiers. So just to share with you what I'm talking about. So you heard Lynette refer to something as a model demonstration. Lynette has 3 schools that are currently in our kind of usability cycle to be able to refine professional learning and resources for the advanced tiers. And so what you see here are the topics and the timelines that if you could wave your magic wand and think about when you would ideally introduce these things, they would happen here. I'm working right now on a statewide universal technical assistance, like a PD offering that would be, you know, a multi-session series that would focus on these things. So we would start with 2 sessions for districts. So, you know, helping district leaders and district implementation team coordinators talk about, well, what is the infrastructure to support the advanced tiers at the district level? What are the decisions that need to happen at the advanced tiers level? But then we would go down and have, after multidisciplinary teams or whoever that team is that is going to attend to the advanced tiers is carefully developed, we would then have a professional learning series where we sit with that team and we introduce them to what are the advanced tiers. What is this process of intensifying literacy instruction or database individualization? We then go into parts 1 and 2 of the components of an intervention system. And we provide people with a worked example for, we have one at the elementary and the secondary level. And so we very much use that worked example to drive the instruction that for the multidisciplinary team in those components. Then what we do is we would talk generically. So because because everyone's got different types of assessments and whatnot and progress monitoring measures, we would have a session on how to use data to inform instructional decision-making. And what you see in this next box, which is like part 2 of that, technically, that would be people bringing their real data. That would be people bringing real progress monitoring data and starting to say, okay, are our kids who are accessing intervention, are they responding to the instruction as we would expect? But if we're doing this statewide, that gets a little bit complex because different people are using different things. So we would do a session, so we wouldn't go into that level of individualization with school teams at this point, but we would actually teach them the process using example data, using, like real progress monitoring data, de-identified intervention group data. And we talk about how to make decisions to determine if a group intensification plan is needed or an individualized intensive intervention plan is needed. So we very much are planning something starting this winter that really could set the stage